You're here, and we'll do it. Um, just see.
Yeah, I got a contractor coming. I don't know, before four. So I don't. If you'd rather do it now, but I may
No,
have
no,
to.
we're live and we're doing.
All
Michael
right.
D. Michael D. Shaw is with me. Charles Moskowitz, welcome to the show, live at YouTube and at subscribing platforms. So, Michael, it's the days and the hours are ticking away, and I think that the more time goes by, the less likelihood that President Trump is going to be able to close the window and be confirmed as the nominee. I see two paths forward at this point.
Right.
The first one is the one pursued by Giuliani and his legal team, and that is to get the case in Pennsylvania before the Supreme Court. And that one looks like it's on track because they now are being reviewed by the Court of Appeals. And if the Court of Appeals says no, then it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has just named the four justices that are going to be involved in reviewing any cases regarding the election. And they are Alito, Thomas, Barrett, and Kavanaugh, four good judges. So there's that venue. The other one, of course, is the real wild card in all of this, and that is Sidney Powell and her Kraken. She has said that she's compiling evidence and getting ready to file cases um, regarding the Dominion, software. So she needs to hit that one out of the park. She's certainly made a lot of statements that she's intending to do it, and she's been, I think, a pretty honest player up until now. But we need to get it going. I mean, she's got to drop that, and I hope she does it very soon.
Well, this is all good. I mean, the only thing that concerns me is that you have some hard deadlines coming up.
Yeah.
And how big is the Kraken going to have to be to suspend this process?
According to what she says, she's gathering. She said she's got a water hose of evidence pouring in and testimonial affidavits from people who are exposing what she says is possibly the biggest conspiracy of the in decades, and it's international in scope. This so-called Dominion server was set up to switch votes when needed.
Yeah, I have no doubt
Oh, yeah.
that this stuff has been occurring. Indeed, it causes you to rethink the origin. I mean, I'm not including New York, but the amazingly quick transformation of California from having four Republican governors in a row, if I recall, to then being this blue state. And I'm sorry, the demographics don't change that rapidly.
It's very suspicious. And I think that going to old-fashioned machine fraud, we can now have, I mean, if there's anything we've learned from this, it's that this is why the left-wing Democrats have been able to hold on to these big cities for decades. They count the votes. When the polls close, their corrupt local, precinct healers go in and they take all of the votes that were not cast and they cast them.
Well, that was that simple. I mean, who decided that every city has to be 1,000% Democrat? I mean, when did
that's
that
right? Occur? And more than 1,000%. I mean,
yeah.
In the case of I think Philadelphia, they were getting votes in that had more than 100% Biden. We're talking about at 4:00 in the morning, a whole satchel of votes coming into that city that had 100% Biden, and we're not talking about a small number here. It was something like close to 100,000 votes.
Well,
that's not technically possible. That is mathematically impossible.
Right, but I will mention this caution. I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but there's many means in healthcare that won't go away. One example is cholesterol heart disease. Has been disproven hundreds and hundreds of papers. However, it's still there. And again, this is not an election, but it's that my fear is all this stuff, Sidney Powell and so on, it's going to come out. Gee, that's very interesting. But life goes on.
Right. They'll just everyone will shrug their shoulders. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
We know that the whole rotten welfare system has been an utter failure and has destroyed families, particularly black families.
Yeah,
And yet everyone just continues to shrug their shoulders and go on. Nothing to see here, you know?
yeah. I'm not really sure that it's going to be so easy to stop at the Supreme Court case. This is completely unprecedented. I mean, if any of this is true, you're talking about massive corruption going back decades. Indeed, everybody remembers JFK and the
Yeah.
tweaking with the votes in Cook County and some precincts in Texas.
Oh,
And
yeah.
by the way, I always wondered, now that we're on this subject, I always wondered how FDR, as a walking dead man, was able to defeat Thomas Dewey in
Good question.
1944. Um,
Well, it was still the war was still on. I'll say that.
the war was going on, but one of the things that came out, well, not that much later, even, was that it's pretty clear that FDR knew about Pearl Harbor in advance.
Right.
There's very
Exactly.
little doubt about that,
That's right.
because in a couple of histories that I've read, Dewey was going to spring this and was convinced, for the good of the country, whatever the hell that meant, that he can't mention this. And by this time, there was a little bit of dissatisfaction with the way the war was going. I mean, it was doing better at that point, but he was. I mean, you talk about Biden hiding in his basement. FDR was
Yeah.
very sick.
He only made one public appearance, and that was at a parade. And this was after he'd gotten injections and he was all fixed up, and they propped him up like some kind of a stuffed doll,
Yeah,
and held him up on the top of a car. I
yeah,
mean, and that was all. And, in a way, like Dewey was the typical Republican. He's sort of a me too. I'll be
yeah.
good. I'm going to kind of come along. And in a way, Nixon did the same thing with Kennedy. I mean, he didn't, he said, okay, fine. I'll have my turn later. And yet with Trump, that's not the case. Trump is not going to roll over like that. He's not part of this sort of establishment
Well, this stupid
entity.
cabal, and it's like it's genetic, Earl, because not only did Dewey lose in 44, but then the 48 election with Truman, and Dewey just ran out the clock. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't describe Trump. So, I mean, the one person that can change it is Trump. No one else is. Everyone else is like kind of abandoning the ship. I mean, I think that he's operating here for the good of the whole country. Everybody knows it was stolen.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a recent poll that shows that upwards of 80% of Republicans believe it was stolen. About 30% of Democrats believe it. And I think that if Trump is able to come out with a really solid piece of evidence that this was the case, then I think people would turn. I think there's still hope,
well,
you know?
I think you're right. The other thing to speculate on is, let's say Biden does get uh, announced as the president.
Right.
This is There is such a cloud over this,
There is.
and
And I think that that's going to carry on. I mean, look, Trump has launched. I mean, David Horowitz just was talking about this. The liberal Democrats have always had the ability to activate on the street.
right,
Every year. I mean, their whole life is wrapped up in politics, whereas conservatives have not. I mean, we've always been too busy working for a living. We don't have but now we do. Starting with the Tea Party, but now particularly with Trump, this is a real movement, and it comes out right now in Atlanta. They're lobbying outside the state house in a state that has been really corrupted, and it's been they have more of these Dominion machines than any other state. Um, I think that Sidney Powell has made some very inflammatory comments about this, which is one of the reasons I think the Trump people distance themselves from her. In that she says that the Dominion company came into the various states with a lot of money involved. I mean,
right.
they got $100 million contract in Georgia, and that she claims, and I'm not saying this is her saying, that Kemp, the Republican governor, and Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State, benefited financially from this.
Well,
That's what
she also says that she thinks Collins was completely wrong.
Yeah, that's right. and that for that matter, maybe Stacey Abrams was robbed. I mean, the point it can play either side. The point is that it's not even a partisan matter. The point is that there is this technology. The left has been talking about this for years. I mean, Elizabeth Warren was talking about this in Congress a year ago. I remember listening to left-wing talk show hosts like Tom Hartman and others, show after show about how electronic voting is controlled by, yeah, well, he was saying by Republicans and by the right, and he may have been right about that. The point is that whoever controls those machines seems to be able to control the vote, and in this case, it obviously was the Biden people controlling.
Well, here's the other thing to think about. I don't understand why all this functionality has to be put in. I mean, think about the basic task here. You're tallying a number of votes. So you have nothing more than a simplistic database that Moscowitz gets these votes and Shaw gets these votes, and that's that.
Right.
So who the hell was interested in some sort of additional module that would allow you to mess with this data? I mean, it seems very, very bad on its face.
Well, it's kind of like what they're doing in higher education now, and even in high school. Instead of giving a person a grade based on their performance, they give an average. They'll measure it out based upon the whole class, and it's all becoming kind of a mechanized type of thing. Now, I heard on an interview on BCP's program on YouTube, he's a great host. He had on this guy who's working closely with Sidney Powell. She's the one that Sidney Powell suggested that Tucker Carlson have on because he's kind of a numbers guy. And he explained how this works. He said he used the example of Maricopa County in Arizona. Just before the election, they replaced all ballpoint pens with these, with these soft pens.
Yeah.
And the soft pens, if it's slightly out of the margin, then the vote gets flagged when you put it in the machine. And you have the option of either voting again and getting back in the line and going back, or you can click a green button, in which case the vote then goes into this pile and it gets counted later. And most people chose the green button. And the point is that who is doing the counting later? I mean, this is after the polls close, they get tabulated.
Well, right. I mean, but that's my point, is who asked for all this additional functionality? Right,
exactly.
In other words, you have a very simple problem here. You want to create a database of simple tallies. There's nothing more simple in the world. So where did the demand come from? Well, let's put this in and we can tweak this and we tweak that. It just seems to be rotten at its base.
And it's not, and we're not going to have another honest election until we get rid of it. And
think of it this way: there's all these electronic health records, and the point of them is to compile various data on a patient. All right, great. Would you think it odd if some hospital said, I also want a module that will allow me to change what the diagnosis was?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this is something that conservatives have been blowing the whistle on for a long time, which is the digitization and the kind of the techization of all information, and how dangerous that is. And in a way, the elite establishment, what they used to do in the old days was they'd have a war, they'd have a revolution, they'd have a depression, they'd have famine. Now they're going to control the world through high tech. Now they're going to be able to control the media and coordinate with their friends at the Mockingbird Press and basically decide who is heard and who isn't through censorship.
But here's the silver lining, right?
And that includes these election technology.
If you're talking about social media, they're overplaying their hand because you've got Parler, you've got Gab, you've got Rumble, and a bunch of platforms that I've probably never heard of. And people are starting to move over there, or at least redundantly putting their content. So you'll reach a point where, there's other places than Twitter, and
it's moving along. I mean, Parler is out doing Twitter right now. I mean, I have Twitter and I like Twitter, but I also have opened a Parler account and I've
Yeah,
opened a Rumble account. I'm putting videos on Rumble. And interestingly enough, just yesterday, I got a notice from YouTube saying that they have approved my station for monetization. I mean, I don't know. Maybe are they trying to like make up for all the censorship? I don't know.
could
I
be,
mean,
could be.
so I mean, I can't complain about that. So I do it all. I've got this show you're watching right now is live on YouTube. It gets downloaded into Podomatic, where then it goes up on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and now I put it on Rumble, and then I send links to all of it to both Twitter and Parler, and all LinkedIn. I've got. I mean, I'm trying to expand.
Well, so but you know what that means is the influence of these giants is slowly being diluted.
Yes, and competition is starting to kick them in the backside, and that's a great development. Now Fox News is being taken on by Newsmax. No, these are good developments. I don't think the media landscape is going to be the same, and I think also the obvious fraud that they were involved in terms of their anti-Trump stand for 4 years and their pollsters. When Trump was absolutely right about the suppression polls, these were lies. They were based on nothing. These that Trump is behind 15 points. I remember we were talking about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, cool.
That's crap, and we knew it at the time. Now it's been proven to be garbage. So they're not. They will never have credibility again. I think that's going to be one of the a roadkill in this election.
So
And
what was the play? I mean, didn't they know who their audience was?
they wanted to suppress the vote. They wanted to create a demoralized feeling. They did. I felt demoralized.
But there
You
were
turn
so
up.
many people who, I mean, I didn't watch their coverage anyway, but there were so many people that tell me that when they saw the reaction of Fox with the, I believe, the Arizona call and the Virginia call, they switched right over to a number of alternatives. Uh, Newsmax was one. I told you I was on Church Militant, but
Me too. I mean, I switched over. I actually think Rachel Maddow, of all people, did a better job than Fox. I mean, I switched
yeah,
to MSNBC and the mainstream media after I couldn't stand it. It was so obviously, I mean, there was something very wrong with Fox. So, maybe the end result is going to be that these people don't have quite the same footprint that they thought they had, that there are alternatives, that people are going to these alternatives, and these alternatives, as we mentioned, they're not going to be stopped. They're going to grow. Parler is now, I think, almost on par with Twitter. So they can't stop that. That's going to be a new fact on the ground. We're going to have diversity of opinion. And I think that if, God forbid, Biden is sworn in, and it looks the way that's quite likely unless something major happens. Uh, the movement behind Trump is so substantial that I think we're going to, first of all, take the 2 seats in Georgia,
oh,
and
that's good news.
we're going to continue to take seats here and there in the House. I think their margin now is shrunk down to less than 10. And within their own Democrat Party, you've got the radicals increasing the only growth they've had. They now have double the number of the squad.
Well, let's
Um,
talk about the House for a second.
yeah,
All right. The margin is, I don't know whether it's 8 or it's some small number of seats. So I want to know, how in the hell did Pelosi get approved essentially that she's got enough votes that she's going to be the speaker again? I mean, what is the magic here that I'm missing?
they're trying to cling to power. They just don't want to. I don't think they want to rock the boat or do anything different. They just, it's kind of like a circling of the wagons, I guess. I mean, they're literally holding by a thread, and they're afraid that if they let in a radical, then you're going to have a bunch of Democrats switch over to Republican.
Well, right, but why can't they pick some other garden variety Democrat?
It would be admitting defeat. They're delusional. I mean, they're continuing. She actually said, "Oh, we have a mandate."
Yeah, we have a mandate. Right?
Yeah, I mean, they're delusional, and I think that what's going to happen in the next 2 years is that the Republicans is going to continue to pick up steam, and in the midterms, the Republicans are going to have a huge red tide, and in 4 years from now, Donald J. Trump will be reelected.
Yeah.
The only fly in the ointment, other than the fact that he might lose now, which is not insignificant, is that they've got to fix this domain software system. They have to expose that.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
cannot let up on that. That has to be.
Now, when do you think, what is the event going to be of all this fraud? that's being talked about. What's going to be the tipping point where the elite media is forced to start reporting something?
I think that, something, I don't think they ever will. I think it's just going to have to, they'll take their losses. It's kind of like the National Football League, they'll continue to lose money. They'll continue to lose audience. They'll continue to be in denial while alternative medias pick it up.
Right. But how do you ignore,
I don't know,
to that, a Supreme Court case? Well, this is nothing bad here. Right?
Look, this whole thing with the Biden having the office of president-elect. I mean, this is completely subversive. It's ignoring reality. He has not been confirmed. There is no president-elect. There's no such thing as an office of president-elect. And yet they're already talking about his cabinet picks, and they're just goose-stepping forward as if he's the nominee. And even if he does become the nominee, it is such a miasma of lies. I mean, of course, they've been lying for 4 years about Trump, saying that he's spying for the Russians. So I just don't think anything is going to stop them. Do you think Rachel Maddow is going to stop? She's got no shame. She was caught in this for 2 years. She's interviewing people who come on breathlessly. Oh, we've got evidence coming up. It's breaking, and the Schiff guy, going around to the media. I'm carrying in my pocket evidence that Trump is spying for the Russians. And then when it's finally, the fiasco is finally exposed, they're still not admitting it. They're still going around like nothing happened. I mean, it's, right. It's the most communistic thing I've ever seen. There's no mooring in reality. There's no willingness. I mean, they know damn well they're lying, but they're just going to goose step along because they know they have the establishment
same thing with Dorsey. Well, no, we didn't really suppress that.
I mean, that's why Biden didn't campaign, because he knew the fix was in. That's why he stayed in the basement. He wasn't worried about campaigning. He knew he had the election in the bag. That's exactly what happened. I mean, I still think that one of the key questions that needs to be answered, and I think this has everything to do with the domain software, in my opinion. I have no evidence for it, but why is it that 6 states shut down on the night of the election, almost at the same minute? They just stopped counting.
And that was almost precisely the time, to interrupt, that Biden came on and said, don't worry, things will get better. Like he knew they were going to pull the rabbit out of the hat.
That's right. He did. And within minutes of this. And the thing is that in every single one of those states, Trump was way ahead.
Yes.
And in the case of Pennsylvania, by over 500,000 votes.
Yeah.
So this gets to, and I think I mentioned it before, but I should mention it again, and it's strictly my theory. If you are investing in stocks on Wall Street and you're doing so electronically, you can put in what's called a stop loss, which is that if the stock dips below a certain price, it automatically sells.
That's right.
You don't have to, it's like a safety valve so that you don't lose everything. And I think that same technology that allows for the creation of a stop loss was embedded into the algorithm of the domain server, so that if Trump picked up a percentage of the vote that was above a certain amount, everything would come to a stop. And then they could refigure out later. Because that does seem to be what happened. It's too coincidental, that all of these states, 6 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, all shut down at the exact same moment. And they all showed Trump ahead, and in some cases significantly ahead. And then when they reopened, Trump was behind. So this is the key to uncovering this, what I argue is a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy. And it's probably the most difficult thing to prove too, because these people are not stupid. I memean, they knew what they were doing and they're willing to lie about it. I mean, the Secretary of State in Michigan, just flat out lying. I mean, asked, won't allow for an audit in Wayne County. Why? Because I know that everything was fine.
Right.
I know that there was no fraud, nothing to see. And she knows that that's a lie. You could tell from her face that
well,
she's
if
lying.
We compare this to the Catholic Church scandals, very similar, that
right.
Nothing to see here, nothing to see here.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden it blows up into this major situation.
Sure.
Uh, and I suspect that something similar is going to happen because you can't
And
suppress.
they still don't totally admit it, and it went on for about it took years. I mean, I know that Cardinal law stayed in place
Yeah,
for I think right down to the final day when the sheriff was about to show up in his office. The day before that, he skipped out of town.
yeah,
I mean, but he just stonewalled. I mean, it was all nothing happening. This is an attack on the church. Now we're told, oh, this is an attack on democracy. They
yeah,
tell us,
yeah.
and that's their line.
It's very similar. Um, but then what happened too with the church thing, you start looking at these side effects. Um, what's with all these guys quitting the seminary, and then you find out, well, there was too much of a homosexual influence,
Right.
and you start trying to add all these things up. And it's the same thing as I'm maintaining. How did you get these big shifts? Why did these places suddenly become totally Democrat? Um,
It happened over time. They gradually infiltrated. I think in the case of the Catholic Church, I remember interviewing this guy Rose, who wrote a book called Goodbye, Good Men. It was about
yes.
the seminary. Do you know about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he said that in the 1960s, the seminary started to welcome in psychologists like Maslow and Rogers, who had this program that basically instructed them in sex education for some reason. Why do they need sex education in the seminary? I don't know, but basically it was legitimizing sexual license to
Right.
priests and to upcoming priests, and it was a gradual thing. I mean, it became sort of a legitimization, and the end result of that was inevitable. And that's how they've done it to the Democratic Party. I mean, you have a few honest Democrats left, like David Horowitz just pointed out, like Alan Dershowitz and
But you
like
know what?
Turley,
Why
Jonathan
should
Turley.
there be any honest Democrats? I mean, why would you want to be the outlet?
Well, that's what's happened. They've infiltrated and taken over the party, just like they've taken over all of the high positions of culture and education in this country. They've even taken over the churches. They've taken over business.
The
Take a look
march
at
through the institutions.
that's right. Gramsci's march through the institutions. Exactly. That's how it's a gradual thing. They're not going to hit. They're not Bolsheviks. They're not even pro-communist. They're not going to hit the streets, and they want to do it by controlling the levers of influence. This is what I mean. David Horowitz is a great writer. He did a book about the foundations. I mean, they were created in 1912 as part of the 16th Amendment, which legalized direct income tax.
Yeah.
Part of that amendment, which went into place in that pivotal year, 1913, was that the big moneyed people like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Fords, they could put their money into these huge foundations where they would be tax free, where they could hire their useless siblings and offspring, and where they could use the money to pay for left wing institutions and causes and ideas and finance them. And they've been doing that ever since. And they
Isn't
have
it
huge
funny
money.
how it worked out with those? That obviously John D. Rockefeller was not a liberal,
No,
but as you went through generations, they all turned.
they did. I mean, this is the same thing with Carnegie, and same thing with these were great industrialists who made a fortune the old-fashioned way, and then their legacy has been under the control of these people who have gradually, through the process of attrition, they weed out conservatives and patriots, and they raise up fellow travelers. That's how the education systems work. That's what academia is all about. So that's what's happened to the Democratic Party, and even to an extent to the Republican Party too.
Okay, but that was my question. Seeing that this is the case, Mr. Democrat, good guy, why are you staying in? Are you genetically predisposed to be Democrat?
They're not conscious. That's why they don't know what they're doing. They've been brain. I mean, I know it's an old-fashioned word, and I maybe you don't mean it literally, but they've been brainwashed at an early age. I think, and they sold out at an early age. Can you imagine if you were a liberal Democrat and you were involved in like one of these fancy social gatherings with your spouse and you're having a nice dinner somewhere, and you mentioned even mildly that you thought that Trump had the election stolen from him, can you imagine what could happen to you? What could happen to your career? What could happen to your marriage? What
Yeah.
could happen to your relationship with your children? I
But
mean,
imagine, but you're right. But imagine walking around as a prisoner of your own conscience like that. That how
I
much of
look, I don't, we should, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that there's a lot of internalizing and a lot of kind of self suppression that goes on. I mean, it probably starts at a fairly early age. People realize, I don't know, they wire themselves in such a way that they don't allow themselves to think about certain things, that those are verboten, and that they think in a certain way. It's very conformist. And that once in a while there's an auto da fe with somebody who
yeah,
bucks the system, like for example Donald Trump. He's thrown every piece of crap you can imagine at him and his family, and that everyone looks at that and they're horrified and they're like, this could be me. They could do that to me. They could call me those names. And Donald Trump is a strong, wealthy, successful man. I can't withstand that. They'll destroy me. It's fear. This is what terrorism is. Terrorism Terrorists will go into an orderly community and they'll create chaos through acts of atrocity. And that people become fearful to the point where they surrender because they don't want to deal with that kind of disorder. They'll say, okay, what can we do? I mean, I suppose a classic psychological example is the Stockholm syndrome, right?
yeah.
You eventually, you're captured, you're held in a total submission to captors, and after a while, you become sympathetic to them because that's how the mind works. You go by the means of least resistance. You kind of conform to whatever you need to conform to in order to have a reasonable life.
Right. But how is this affecting someone that doesn't believe that? So he's putting on this act because of fear. Is that why so many people are on psychotropic
Yes,
medications?
and that's why the establishment promotes these types of drugs. And that's why they promote, I mean, so much entertainment. I mean, so the Roman idea of bread and circus. The great rock stars and drug use and other things to anesthetize ourselves and to sort of keep ourselves. I mean, I don't know. I think I mentioned this also to you, and I'll mention it again. I heard an interview on NPR where these three psychologists or social workers were sitting around talking about the fact that women, we'll finish up, that women who had had abortions at a young age were suddenly becoming depressed when they were older because they were thinking, gee, I wonder what my child would have been like if he or she had lived.
Yeah.
And so what these women were scratching their heads, what can we do about this? This brings in a question of our beloved abortions. And their answer was drugs.
Yeah.
Put them on psycho drugs.
Yeah.
They'll feel better. So that's exactly what it's about. It's about controlling. I mean, the whole premise of this thing is mass control of people, but it's also self-control in that you conform to these things and you get the awards. And if you buck these things, you're going to end up like Donald Trump. I mean, look what they're talking about now, the left. I've seen already
Yeah.
from people like, it's the Nicholas II approach, right? Tsar Nicholas. They're going to take his whole family and put him in a basement and kill them. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, he's going to go to jail, and all these charges are going to be brought. You've got this attorney general in New York saying she's got about 50 new charges that she's going to bring against him the day after the inauguration. This is what they're going to do. And this is a message to all Americans that you had better get in line, or this could be you. Because look at, if we can do this to a man like Donald Trump, president of the United States, then we're going to kill you. That's what this is about.
Well, I guess that's why I'm happy that there's 350 million guns in the U.S.
That's right, and that's why exactly, and that's and there's a movement, and there is a growing system of genuine checks and balances. Anyway, Michael, I see you've got to go, so
Yeah, well, this was an impromptu
Yeah.
but exciting
Always.
discussion.
Thanks a lot. Yeah,
And
you
I
bet.
guess this covers the Wednesday show. So I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
Same here. Yeah, exactly.
Try not to think about the election for a day or so.
And don't let the COVID Gestapo come in either.
Oh boy. All right.
All right, Mike.
You have a good one.
You too. I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Be well.